This bridge connects the city of Ripley, Oklahoma, to the other side of the Cimarron River. Running parallel to the river is a long and winding dirt road. The eastern end of the road dips down into a shady valley, and Ripley locals have called it Ghost Hollow as far back as the 1920s. The path heading west goes on for miles, but the counties used a rusted-out bridge as a roadblock, barring cars from going any further. According to anyone who spent time in Ripley, the area between Ghost Hollow and the western bridge is cursed. Talk of a curse likely started within a decade of the town's 1900 founding. I figure this because of how many bad things have happened to the town just a few years after it was founded. In 1911, a fire destroyed a good chunk of the town. Shortly after, the wagon bridge which finally made ferries obsolete washed out in a storm. The bridge was less than 3 years old, and its construction had been celebrated by locals until 1:30 a.m. The most consistent folk tale about the area takes the cause of the curse to be a triple lynching. In either 1888 or 1899, depending who you talk to, 3 horse thieves were supposedly hanged from a single branch, just where the road meets its eastern end. At the time of filming, someone dumped a dead horse right at the site of the hanging. A separate tale identifies the western bridge as a site of an auto accident. A few people died and the bridge ended up haunted by the spirit of the victims, becoming one of many crybaby bridges. Crybaby bridges are one of the most common kinds of folktales in the United States, and each bridge has roughly the same story. A baby dies nearby, mostly in a car accident, and the mother's stuck eternally mourning it or searching for it. In this case, leaving a baby Ruth bar on the bridge will coax out soft cries from the woods nearby. One local recounts seeing a woman sitting motionless in the water. When they called to her, she vanished. Some have heard a woman's laughter. While I was exploring the bridge, I went up on a small rocky hill that overlooks it, and I heard unmistakably 2 human voices whistling. This whistle played a clear melody twice. It went. And it sounded like it was 2 people whistling in unison. And I'm positive no one else was around. I checked, I called out to people, and there was no one there. I'm sure I heard about 2 seconds worth of whistling from 2 different voices. Hearing that whistling was definitely creepy, but it didn't really scare me away. What makes me nervous about the area is actually the strong white supremacist presence. Every time I come back to Ghost Hollow, there's new symbols of hate, and Crybaby Bridge is just full of swastikas and long messages declaring Ripley for straight whites only. I've been told not to go into the hollow at night, or else I risk running into some racist teenagers or some genuine white supremacist groups. The area around Ripley, Cushing, Yale, Oklahoma, which are about a 20-mile radius, have a long history of racism and vigilante groups. In 1920, the KKK made a resurgence in Oklahoma, and rallies not far from the hollow drew crowds of about 3,000. The Tulsa Race Massacre was just 1 year after the KKK got a foothold in the area. So Oklahoma, but particularly this part of Oklahoma west of Tulsa, is just a hotbed of white supremacist activity. And it's been that way for now 100 years. The last time I was at the bridge, I noticed these fresh tags. I have no idea what it means. Chi Omega Alpha Gamma Rho, 1855, 1848, 1849, 1858. I am assuming the Greek letters have something to do with the sorority or frat from the local school, but the dates I have no clue on. We are heading back into Ghost Hollow to the east side to try to find the hanging tree. Some people say it's still there, some people say it got torn down or fell down in a storm. A few people have said that After the horse thieves were hung, all of the bark fell off and made it luminescent in the moonlight. Do you see it? I don't see it at all.
Do you see those, like, that piece of grass? It's like right there. It kind of goes up and then it goes down. Yeah, it's like dead. I heard that noise. I was looking right there. I was looking at the noise. And the plane fucking moved like this. And it went back. And there was nothing there.
Fucking scared the shit out of me. I heard the deer run across 20 feet in front of me, and there was nothing.
Want to describe what just happened?
Well, we were in the hollow, and we heard what sounded like footsteps, kind of like a sludging, like through the leaves. And we thought it might have been deer that we saw earlier, but this just kept getting closer and closer until it was about maybe like 10 feet away. So we shine our lights in the direction of the sound, and there's nothing there making this noise. Like we're watching like where the noise is coming from, but there's no deer, there's nothing. And then suddenly there was like more of these noises around us, and maybe 2 or 3 separate spots that were like trudging through the leaves.
I wanted to come back today to explain what was going on last night here. Bryce and I went down this road, which is the main road into Ghost Hollow. This is Ghost Hollow proper right here. This is the little valley. And we crossed from the road into the woods, and we just get a few feet in when I say, oh, I hear something. In front of us, it sounds like somebody or a deer walking in front of us, lifting its legs up and slowly walking through the leaves and brush. We listen, and Bryce bends down, and as he bends down, I hear the single sound split into 2, and one thing walks over 10, 15 feet in front of me to my right, and another is directly straight ahead here through the clearing of those trees. And they start to kind of circle around us, but there's nothing there. We can't see anything. So Bryce bends down next to this tree and shines his light through the clearing and says, oh, here comes the deer, because that tall grass up ahead bends over as if an animal, a big animal, stepping on it, but there's just nothing there. And he sees the grass bend over and pop back up, and it was not windy. There's nothing in front of us. So I just say, okay, I'm going to go back to the road and see if I could see the deer from the other side of the road, because the road wraps around the woods. So I head back here, and as soon as I get to this road, I turn my camera and I gasp. Again, 10, 20 feet, that range in front of me, I hear what sounds like a person or deer, something with long legs that run across this road. And there's nothing there. Again, I had my light on, I was filming, and there's just nothing there. It's been a few weeks and we got a lot of rain. The greenery makes Ghost Hollow look like a totally different area. In the meantime, someone picked up the horse carcass, although they left its tail. I've also found some more information on the lynchings. While there are no primary sources attesting to the lynchings, the story fits really well with Oklahoma's past. Between 1885 and 1907, Oklahoma had 106 documented lynchings. That's 22 per year. The majority of these were forms of vigilante justice against criminals, particularly horse thieves and cattle rustlers. Most of them took place above an imaginary line extending from Miami to Altus, dividing the state diagonally in half. Ripley is just north of this imaginary line. Pair this with the strong local presence of vigilante groups like the KKK, and the fact that Oklahoma only achieved statehood in 1907. A persistent story about 3 horse thieves being lynched here, especially during that period, is not unbelievable. Over this small bridge, which connects the road to the eastern end of Ghost Hollow, one person said they had a vision of 3 bodies hanging from one of the trees. Again, the lynching tree, the dead horse, and the bridge are exactly where Bryce and I encountered our invisible footsteps. On the way out of Ghost Hollow, we found this gate with this old abandoned house. This is my land, not yours. If gate is open, you are welcome. If it is shut, do not trespass. If you do, your intention will be considered questionable and you'll be treated as a hostile. If you need to contact me, leave a note on this gate and I'll respond at my convenience. Okay. The strange, alluring feel of the area is not limited to just Ripley and Ghost Hollow. A few minutes north of Ripley is Ingalls, Oklahoma, now a ghost town. But in 1893 it was the site of the Battle of Ingalls, a shootout between U.S. Marshals and the Doolin-Dalton gang. A few decades earlier, Washington Irving had taken an expedition through the West, and this area is actually the subject of his book, A Tour Through the Prairies. And the most interesting story about the entire area, and the one that's actually the most credible, takes place between Cushing and Ripley, somewhere between Ghost Hollow and the farmlands of Cushing. Cushing is about 10 miles east of Ripley, about 7 or 8 miles east of Ghost Hollow. In the middle of the night on May 7th, 1896, a sickly man knocked on the door of a local Cushing farmer, Richard Fox, asking for shelter. The farmer allowed him to sleep in a spare room. When morning came, the stranger was found dead. On his neck was a deep puncture wound. No one was sure whether this wound was incurred before staying with the farmer or after. Papers testified to the injury resembling a stab wound. It looked as though someone had driven a nail or long needle through the side of his throat. A wallet and some empty envelopes were his only possessions. The envelopes were addressed to one Simon Malston in Sherman, Texas. This matched the stranger's immigration papers, which identified him as a Canadian citizen. What was a Canadian immigrant to Texas doing in what was then the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma? The nearest towns were Ingalls, Meridian, Cushing, and the then unofficial settlement of Ripley. Where did he come from? Malston was given a cheap funeral on May 9th, 1896. One paper says that there were 12 people at the funeral, 12 witnesses for what was about to happen. As the 12 tearless mourners, all strangers to Malston, watched the body descend into the ground, a clap of thunder rang out surrounding them, and a white dove fell down dead onto his casket. People in Cushing were frightened. They thought this was some sort of divine or supernatural omen. The story got around so quickly that within 3 days of the funeral, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas papers were all reporting on it, and they were calling for the investigation of the death as a murder. But I can't find any more information on this. I've asked a few historians from OU and OSU, the 2 big schools in Oklahoma, and none of them have any information on it. I've looked through records of the Oklahoma Historical Society and all the newspapers I could find from Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and none mention Malston or Fox after this event. As soon as this happened, it faded into history. It seems like there was no follow-up, at least no documentable follow-up. But that's the case with so much of Oklahoma. There are hundreds of towns that have been lost to history. These towns are full of some of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen, but they're just sitting, crumbling away. Some of the buildings in Cushing, talking to locals, aren't even owned by anybody anymore. They're just rotting. And that's Oklahoma. That's much of the Midwest. That's what America is. It's a collection of beautiful memories, of beautiful and weird people in beautiful and weird towns, buried under the history of so-called progress. Just as those weird and beautiful people buried the beauty of anyone before them who stood in the way of westward expansion.